Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance, and this resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Rachel, and here's her story. Hi, Ollie. My name is Rachel. First name only, please. This is my first time writing in. I am 43 years young. My story begins the day I was born. The first way I have inconvenienced my mother was being born on her 18th birthday. She and my father had already been separated. Apparently, they split before my mother found out she was pregnant with me, and he had already moved on a bit, as my next sibling is 8 months younger than I am by another woman. Later that year, in 1975, they divorced on my father's birthday. Not sure how that worked out, but I have checked. This is actually one of the facts that pan out about these two. My father was not in my life. I met him when I was 7. They couldn't work it out for me to have a relationship with my father, although sometimes this could have been a blessing. My father went away to prison within days of our first meeting when I was 7. My mom worked and went to school. I grew up with my mother's family in the early days. It was some of the best in my life. She grew up poor, one of the few white families that grew up in Pruitt-Ego, first projects of the U.S., St. Louis, Missouri, so our family was poor. I would have never known that, though, in my early years. We had a couple places together, my grandparents, my mother's 2 brothers, and her sister, along with her husband and my 2 cousins. Since my mother was never home, it was my grandmother who basically raised me along with the other members of our household. I was aware I didn't have a daddy like my cousins did, but with all of the love I had in those days, it wasn't a big deal. Fast forward to me being 4 years old. My mother, who gave up school and was just focusing on work, was going out with her friends, brings home Rick. I didn't like him, but my mother did. I guess she and he were caught having sex, as one day we were no longer living in the home. We were no longer living in the only home and environment I ever knew. We were suddenly in an efficiency apartment with Rick, and it was disgusting. I recall helping her clean his place up. I also recall being exposed to them having a lot of relations. We literally had a room with their bed and a chair I slept in, a small kitchen area, and a room with a toilet and a shower stall. I guess they grew tired of my interrupting their sex life as I was dropped off with Rick's parents. They were strangers to me. Jesus. Anything for dick and attention, huh? Just leave your little child with anybody. Ollie, those MFers left me for 6 months. I didn't get to come back home until after my mother was pregnant with my golden child sister. I went from what had become my grandmother, who was more like a mother to me than my own mother, my grandpa, my uncles and aunt and cousins, to them having no contact with one another. My mom and her family. I don't know when I did, but I do remember calling my grandma after finding her number somewhere and getting her and my mother back on the phone with each other. During this time, I remember having my first thoughts of suicide and wanting to run away. I hear you on your channel talk a lot about how many of the mothers are only attention-seeking, and this struck a chord with me and her abandoning me with her boyfriend's family. Although I learned to love his family and got to know other cousins, etc., she abandoned me for dick and attention. Tears well up in my eyes as I write this. You would think I would have gotten over this, but it still hurts and makes me wonder if the course of our life would have been different. So Rick's parents owned the efficiency apartment we lived in. They were able to convert 2 of the apartments into one living area once I was brought back to live with them. At least now I didn't have a front row to their sex life. She had my sister, and I was dropped off with my mother's mother for a few weeks. Could have been months. I was in school, and the school itself was a couple blocks away from my grandparents' apartment. Plus, I was okay with them. The attention I lacked from my mother, my grandmother gave me in spades, which is part of the reason why she left you at Rick's parents, not her mother. She wants you having it better than she had it. I go back to live with my mother. She didn't marry Rick until after my sister started walking. Apparently, my father, who I had the great misfortune to her of looking just like, had broken her heart and made her not trust men, so she made him beg to get married. During this time, I was your typical kid, wanted to play and have fun. I recall a couple of things that come to mind during this time. One, my grandpa, stepdad's dad, came by our house after I had an accident at school that required stitches to my bottom lip. For some reason, after getting back from the hospital, my baby sister and I, were left at home while our parents were shopping. My grandpa, and my mother got into it bad when they got back. He was super pissed she left a 7-year-old and an infant home alone. I believe they started taking us everywhere after that, but we were made to always stay in the car while they ran in to do whatever. 2, I was sexually molested by a man in the neighborhood. Back in those days, 70s and 80s, we did this thing called play outside. Kids today don't know what they're missing. Well, I was the minority, being a white girl in a rough little neighborhood, but it never stopped me from making friends. I used to play with these 2 little girls who lived on the corner from us. There was a man we called Crazy Kenny. He had an interesting looking bicycle and would come around us girls a lot. Stacy and Amy and my 2 little friends were sent to my house a few times to see if I could come out and play. Most of the time I could, but sometimes my mother would decide I couldn't. Crazy Kenny would send them with candy from him on those days that I was allowed to leave. That is how it started anyway. Then as things progressed, Kenny would get me by himself. Once he tried to tell me where babies came from. He had me sit on his lap while he told me the story. And you're telling me your mother doesn't know any better? Of course not, because her head's looking for dick and attention. I told my mother that night. She then woke me up in the middle of the night when Rick got home and to tell him too. They told me to stay away from him. That was it. They didn't want to know where he comes from, what he looks like, things I would ask if it were my 7-year-old child. Nope, just stay away. No reason for it. I didn't know just how much danger I was in. Hindsight, well, he eventually got me alone again. This time he molested me. I knew something was wrong about this, so I made up a lie to get away from him. I darted home to tell my mother. As usual, she was wrapped up in caring for my baby sister and wouldn't make the time for me. I told her it's important, and she blew me off. I asked if I could go to the neighbor's house, Dorothy, whom she allowed. Thing is, my mother usually let me run around the neighborhood as it was easier for her to focus on the family she did want. I told Dorothy what happened to me. She took me back to my mother and told her what I told her. Dorothy was like a grandma type, much older woman. She made time for me to tell her what happened. I wasn't even her family. My mother decided I should be punished, and I was no longer allowed to go outside with my friends. She wasn't the one who called the police either. It was the neighbor. So your mother tried to punish you for being molested. No wonder you ended up suicidal. I was being yelled at by my mother when the detectives and the police arrived with Crazy Kennedy in custody in the back of the police car. She was a bit nicer to me when they were there, although she was upset Rick had to be called in from work and wasn't afraid to tell me about that on the way to the hospital for them to examine me. So they're taking you to the hospital to basically do a rape kit on you, and she's threatening you. Only because it was arranged by the courts, I did get a little therapy during that time. Otherwise, at later times, I was told I make too big of a deal out of what happened to me, a theme that would continue later on. I thank God for Dorothy and her calling the police for me. Crazy Kenny would have offended again, if not with me, with any of the other girls in our neighborhood. But how dare I go around that man again? They will always blame you. They will always blame you. No matter what. And you go around thinking it's your fault at 7 years old that you get molested. You know, when it happened with those gay guys my mother left me with, and I was going to tell them, and then I hear her downstairs laughing. When the guy was in charge, oh yeah, one of the guys just pulled out his dick in front of Matthew, and it was, you know, that fucking cackle of hers. Time goes by, and we had to move because of what happened to me. Apparently my bad for getting molested as a little kid. As I grew older, I could not do no right, but my younger sister, she walked on water according to our parents. Yes, my mom and Rick did marry, and he eventually let me call him Dad. However, and this is jumping way ahead, my mother and sister were out of town on a trip on my dime, by the way. I was paying rent, apparently, and not saving up for a car when I got my first job, and my mother used my car funds for a trip to the Pacific Northwest with my sister, leaving me and my dad home alone. We had been having more issues as I got older. I never felt like I was wanted by her, but it got worse when I got older, and I would run away, and I also attempted suicide. It was always my fault. Well, while they were on their trip, I had a girlfriend of mine stay the night. My stepdad came home from work and invited us in his room to watch a movie. It was bondage porn. He felt us both up, told us he was giving us full body massages. I feigned being sick. We were able to lock ourselves in my sister's room for the night. He came to the door and knocked and asked if we were coming back out. I said no, we're going to sleep. The next day, Rick drops us off at her house and gave us both $20 to keep a secret. I felt so disgusting. I couldn't tell my mother this. She and Rick had been exponentially violent with me as I came up. My sister does validate me in the fact I did take beatings for both of us over every little thing. We were left home alone all the time since we moved to the new house, and if anything was not done, chores, I would get beat. She was a very lazy kid, and because I was treated like the family slave anyway, she would refuse to do her part of the chores, or for fun, she would get me snatched up by my hair and beat if I forgot something, even if it was her chore. They didn't care. I was a whipping dog. Well, months later, from the secret and the other things going on in my life, I finally told my grandmother, my mom's mom, what had happened to me and my friend. I was staying at grandma's off and on since freshman year. It was safer than me trying to make my own way on the streets over the years. My grandma saw for herself how I was treated like a second-class citizen in my family. Of course, my mother hates the fact that I had this special relationship with her, and after she passed, my grandmother did this or that. If it was true, why didn't she confront her when she was alive so she could stick up for herself? When it came out what Rick had did, you guessed it, I made too big of a deal of it. I was sent back to mom's after family therapy and I attempted suicide again. When I was in the hospital, I was put in inpatient. When I told why, I was taken out of their custody. 3 months go by and I'm locked up. The only way out is to recant my statement of sexual abuse and the physical abuse I suffered. It came down to the devil I knew. The state rewarded my parents by sending them to Washington to tell Congress how great the home therapy program was. Well, the invitation was really from my mom, but my stepdad and sister were able to go. I had to stay with my grandma. The program worked so damn great that I couldn't be there. I was 17 then. I stayed for a little while longer, then moved out with the first jerk willing to get me away. I know I should have just stuck to my guns and the truth while I was in the hospital post-suicide attempt. Hindsight. Although this is not the end of my story, I will have to write in with the rest of it. Thanks, Rachel. Well, that's a sad one. The narcissist will make it your fault no matter what. No matter what. You have to stick to your guns. And at the end, you had to recant. And then what does she do? They go to Washington and testify to Congress of how this program helped their fucked up daughter. Meanwhile, the woman's still she knows what her husband did. She knows what her husband did and she doesn't care. And what about your friend? Doesn't your friend back this up if it happened to her too? The narcissist will always make it your fault. Always. So stick to your guns. That's the lesson learned here. So, I hope that helps. Thank you for your contribution and your story, Rachel. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comment section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, a phone call, have a private video made, or a Facebook live chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who needs help and can't afford it, or just make a contribution to the channel in general to keep it supported, growing, and successful, because this channel survives 100% on contributions from all of you. Without you guys, all this goes away. So if you like what you see here and you want to see more videos like this, you know what to do with the PayPal and email links in the description box. Also, please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all my video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been The Narcissistic Resistance. Take care.